Intelligent people are going to watch YouTube and they're going to realize that the currency has a half-life, right? The US dollar had a half-life of 10 years. And now it has a half-life of 5 years. Mm-hmm. And every other currency has a half. If I were to parse the real significant high points of that, you have Andrew, who represents mainstream media, stating, I can't get through an interview without talking about this. Roll the clock back 2 or 3 years ago, I don't think that was true. So that's the mainstream media embracing the Reformation. Then you have Janet saying, then you have Andrew saying, a nation state has considered adopting Bitcoin as a technology for payments. I think that's a second iconic thing. I think when she says lots of Americans have this as part of their investment strategy, that's a third iconic event. When she says we got to regulate it responsibly, that's nothing more than what you would expect any adult working in an administration to say. You would say the same thing if I put you in charge of something. I got to handle it responsibly. And then the final statement, and Andrew kind of cuts her off slightly, where she says, we're going to create an environment where innovation can continue, right? Was a pretty big deal. In essence, it's the White House, the most powerful government in the world, embracing Bitcoin and also endorsing the crypto reformation. We're really living through a reformation right now, and you're watching history being made right in front of your eyes. One day people will look back at this 30 years from now and say, this is when the entire inversion of the monetary order took place, and more than the monetary order, right? It transcends even any one industry. I think if you roll the clock back to the entry of the Biden administration, the seminal events in the industry were Biden being elected. Biden has been very constructive with regard to innovation. If you look at the financial regulators that came in with the Biden administration, including Janet Yellen and Gary Gensler and the like, they're very informed, very constructive. If you actually, you could say this was a surprise, but if you looked at the written testimony that Janet Yellen gave while she was being vetted by Congress, while they were deciding on her appointment, she said pretty much the same words that she just said to Andrew in that 1 minute clip. She said, we need to responsibly regulate it, and this is a force for innovation and good and progress. And I think Gensler has said the same thing, and I think the other administrators, the other regulators have said the same thing. Last week was a massive milestone. But if you were surprised by last week, you weren't paying attention for the past year and a half, because all of the indicators that the political system, the White House, Congress, and the Senate are pro-crypto and pro-Bitcoin in specific. All of those things have been there since the election. And I'd say what we saw last week was the President of the United States directing 18 government agencies to figure out how to embrace this new revolution, and reminding everybody that there are 40 million Americans that are pro-crypto and pro-Bitcoin, and there's nobody anti. The majority of Congress likes what's happening. The majority of the Senate is supportive of Bitcoin. The majority of regulators in the White House are in support of Bitcoin. The majority of regulators everywhere in the world are supportive of Bitcoin. And if what you want to do is use it as digital property, there's not even any controversy. But you have to dig for the controversy. And if you push hard enough, like, they won't let me transfer it secretly without paying taxes on it, and I'm really angry about that, you can find some controversy. But in fact, this is such an obvious innovation in the economy that if people got away from the trollish fixation on finding someone to disagree with a hyperbolic statement I will make, they would realize that there's $100 trillion of money that needs to flow into this economy, and it's not there yet. And everybody is loudly endorsing it if you're listening. we're still in the stage of adoption where there is friction and there's prejudice and there is fear, right? There is. So I think we can all agree that there's still that, but the indicia, right? The indicia of institutional adoption and the likelihood that the institution and the establishment embrace this has never been clearer than it is today. Let's say it's going to be a 36-month, 24-month, 36-month, 48-month delay before banks catch up, but smaller banks are offering Bitcoin services. The larger banks, not yet, but Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, there are parts of those banks that are very reactionary and they push back. And on the other hand, another part of Morgan Stanley ends up owning $500 million worth of my stock, right? At the same time that the part of Morgan Stanley doesn't want anybody to buy your fund. And so these are, these are not monolithic conglomerates, right? These tend to be massive organizations with 100 different divisions, each of them making independent decisions. And the good fortune there is, if everybody completely rationally embraced this thing, Bitcoin would cost you $3 million a coin, and you would lose, the next 20x opportunity for you. So you almost don't want them to figure it out too fast, because otherwise you're the stupid money. I'd rather be the smart money and wait for the stupid money to learn over the course of 5 to 10 years, because we need someone to be buying this stuff when it hits $5 million a coin, Anthony, right? I think the sovereign wealth funds will come first. I mean, the first adoption will be any sovereign wealth fund like, UAE or Saudi Arabia or Norway or Switzerland that would hold big tech stocks. If you would hold $10 billion worth of Apple or Google or Facebook or Amazon, I think some of those will roll into Bitcoin. I think that some countries are being forced to consider other payment options. I mean, like the Russians are being forced. If you get kicked off of SWIFT, that drives and catalyzes something. And then I think it'll be a while, but we're really waiting for a small, mid-sized company that has its own currency to print its currency and buy Bitcoin. I don't think it's a this year thing or a next year thing, but at some point somebody will figure it out. If you're selling $50 billion worth of commodities or exports every year, and you're using the dollar as your treasury reserve asset, you're propping up $100 trillion currency that's inflating at 10, 15, 20% a year. So that's just shipping. That's in essence shipping all of your treasury to the dollar over the course of a decade. If you switch that and you started buying CNY, you'd be propping up the Chinese currency. Instead of propping up $100 trillion currency, you'd be propping up a $20 or $30 trillion currency, and that's to the benefit of the Chinese. If you switch to gold, you would be propping up a $12 trillion currency. And if you switch to Bitcoin, you would be propping up a less than $1 trillion currency. So if people were rational, I don't think they are, by the way. Luckily for us, 98% of them aren't, because you couldn't be in the top 2% if everybody else was as smarter than you, could you? The obvious thing to do if you're an export country is you start exporting in Bitcoin, and then you sweep your cash flows into Bitcoin. And then, you probably make like $500 billion or $1 trillion because you did that. If you're the first mover, who will do that? Well, I mean, why wouldn't you do that, by the way? Why hasn't Apple bought $20 billion of Bitcoin and made $100 billion overnight yet? The answer is they're afraid, and they have political constraints. They're afraid of their shareholders. The accounting makes it ugly. So, you wonder, why don't they just bend over and make $1 trillion? Remember when I tweeted to Elon, I said, I didn't say buy $1 billion worth of Bitcoin. I said buy 10 billion worth of Bitcoin, and then issue $10 billion of converts and buy 10 billion more, and you make 100 billion, and then all the S&P follows you and you make $1 trillion. Well, he didn't quite do that, right? I mean, he did a little bit. I'm okay with the $1.5 billion, but the point is, why doesn't someone do a $25 billion buy at Google? And the answer is because of politics and institutional inertia. And, some people don't want the trillion. Okay, so why doesn't a government do it? Politics, institutional inertia. When will they do it? Well, that this is the butterfly effect, right, guys? It's like, how do you predict when someone gets whacked on the side of the head and knocked out of their comfort zone and decides to go and bend over and pick up the $1 trillion? Any of 1,000 people could do it, and maybe none of them will do it. But if you're betting that not a single one of them wants the $1 trillion, I mean, it seems to me like over a decade, somebody wants the $1 trillion. I just don't know who will have the courage and the clarity of conviction to do it. Market thinks that we're hitting a recession. They're never going to raise interest rates. They're going to raise them 2-3 times and stop. And and interest rates are never going to get above 150 basis points ever. That's what they're thinking. Or what you have is a non-economic, non-market actor just holding down the long end of the yield curve with infinite money by printing money. In either case, the conclusion is currencies continue to weaken. Second tier currencies collapse. Third tier currencies all collapse. The first tier currencies weaken 15-20%. And I think if we come back to the big theory of money here, right, under the gold standard, if the dollar was backed by gold, it was stable, to Mark's point. But if we thought about it deeply, gold is not perfect money. Gold has actually got a half-life of 35 years. The reason the dollar was stable was the economy was growing on average 2% a year, and the supply of money on average was growing at 2% a year. And if both of those things peg, and if you're an economist, you realize it's almost impossible to grow anything more than 2 or 3% a year over the course of a long period of time. So we never had good money, right? We never had hard money. If we had perfect money, the value of the dollar wouldn't have stayed constant. The value of the dollar would have increased by 2 to 3% a year. And over the course of 30 years, you would have doubled your wealth by just saving money or more. And everything just keeps getting cheaper. So under perfect money, you have deflation. Under gold money, you have constant prices. Under fiat money, you have rampant inflation. And most people, they've got this fiction that, even if you look at official government documents, they keep talking about purchasing power, and they calculate it based on CPI, and they tell you that your money lost 95% of its value. That is not true, right? If you look at the last 100 years, take the US dollar. I'm sitting in a house that cost $100,000 in 1930. I have the bill of sale on the wall, and Zillow thinks it's worth $28 million right now. The money lost 99.5% of its value over 80 to 90 years. And if you back calculate the real loss of purchasing power against a market basket of scarce assets of the US dollar, you conclude that we're really inflating the currency 7 to 8% a year every year for 100 years. You get the money supply plus 2 or 3% in the economy. Once you do that, what you realize is the very best currency loses 99.5% or 99.8% of its value over 100 years. Every other currency loses 100% of its value over 100 years.
Right.
Now, the real question is, what do you adopt as your treasury reserve asset? And if it's currency and currency derivatives in dollars, you have made the institutional decision to surrender 99.5% of your assets to the government over the course of 80, 90 years. The only choice you had in the last 10,000 years was maybe gold, but gold was never perfected money. It was always, it's double imperfect, right? It's losing 2% of its value a year, and also is getting debased by whoever controls the mint, and it's also getting seized. So gold is like triple imperfect money. We didn't have anything that looked like theoretically perfect money until January 3rd, 2009. And then it took about 10 years of beating on it to determine that it wasn't going to crumple under some kind of engineering mistake. And so now here you are in the year 2022, and reasonable, intelligent people have concluded that this is engineered perfect money. That's like 2, 3, 4% of the marketplace. 97% of the people don't even know what money means. And if you don't know what money is, then you couldn't actually go on a search for engineered perfect money. And if you look at the Russians and the Chinese, they've all been hit with a 2x4 in the head, and they've been invited to consider whether or not a Treasury Reserve strategy of holding fiat currency and credit derivatives is in fact perfect money. And now they know it isn't perfect, and they either have to look back to the 19th century and gold, which was the best idea for 10,000 years, but a crappy idea that failed 5,000 times, or, and we know why, because it's centralized and you can debase it, or you roll forward to the 21st century and you ask, is there a better idea? And Bitcoin is the better idea, wrapped in all the crypto technology that comes with. Intelligent people are going to watch YouTube, and they're going to realize that the currency has a half-life, right? The US dollar had a half-life of 10 years, and now it has a half-life of 5 years. And every other currency has a half-life of 3 years. Gold has a half-life of 30 years. Bitcoin has a half-life of forever, infinite, forever. Once people figure that out, you have a mass exodus, an evacuation, not from Europe to the New World, but from real space to cyberspace. The money goes from analog to digital, and it goes from unencrypted to encrypted. And the only place you can run to save your life force, to avoid, in essence, what is a heat death or an energy death by having all the energy sucked out of your body, is you have to encrypt your life force, right, on a network which is beyond nation state control. And there's one of them, right? Bitcoin, that's what we're talking about. And I think that's what happens, right? I mean, the intelligent people are going to exit, right, on an arc of encrypted energy. And the ignorant ones are not going to exit, and they're going to have the life force sucked out of them. All the major Wall Street hedge funds and the major banks and the major regulators were much more critical 24 months and 36 months ago than they are today. I think I would approach the skeptics and I would say, look, Joe Biden says that it's really important to 40 million Americans. What do you think about? Generally, the president has a lot of power, Anthony, right? I've noticed the presidents of the United States are able to encourage all sorts of behavior. Some of them I don't even, advocate, but they have a lot of power. And I think you could go and say, look, Janet Yellen, who's the Secretary of the Treasury, hear her words. I mean, if you look at what I tweeted before I got on this call, I grabbed that 97 seconds, of fame that we started the show with, and I grabbed Yellen's quote. The quote is, "Crypto has grown by leaps and bounds and is now playing a significant role in the investment decisions of lots of Americans. We would like to create a regulatory environment in which healthy innovation can continue." That is Janet Yellen to Andrew Ross Sorkin this morning. Okay, so I think you've got two sets of people. You've got the people that kind of think for themselves and they derive from first principles. They have to have a certain educational background, a certain life background, and they got to invest anywhere from 10 to 100 hours. And to those people, you say, hey, you think for yourself and you're pretty smart. Would you like to make $1 billion? If so, I need you to spend 10 to 100 hours. If you're just so rich that the opportunity cost of your time is higher and you don't want to invest 100 hours to make $1 billion, then I guess you can go focus on something else. Well, I made a list of every Wall Street leader in the past 12 months that flipped their tune. Remember when Ray Dalio said, oh, it's so good the government's going to ban it? And then you're like, but then guess what? The government said they're going to actually embrace it. Okay, there's Ray. We got him. You remember when Larry Fink said this is an index of money laundering? And then, oh yeah, well, he said that before he said, well, it looks like it's going to change the world in his shareholder letter. You remember when Michael Saylor bought nearly $4 billion, like 3.95 something billion dollars of Bitcoin. By the way, Anthony, I am like 1,000% committed. I started with 400 million of capital and I managed to buy 4 billion in Bitcoin. I don't believe in 5% allocation or 60% allocation. I believe in 500% allocation. So the Michael Saylor dude in 2013 said, it's only a matter of time before this stuff goes the way of online gambling. It's going away. The world's full of skeptics that flip their tune.